Hello and welcome to the Edina High School Junior Night NCAA Education. My name is Jeremiah Carter. I am the Director of Athletic Compliance here at the University of Minnesota. I've been doing this educational session for Edina High School for a number of years now. So even though I can't be with you in person this year, I'm really happy to be able to continue this. So this is really aimed at any parents or student athletes, prospective student athletes that are planning to enroll sometime in the next 2 years at an NCAA Division 1, 2, or 3 institution. And it's going to give you some of the basic tools and terminology that you'll need to know in order to hopefully become eligible and participate at a Division 1, 2, or 3 institution. So the first thing that I want to lay out, there is something called the Guide for the College-Bound Student Athlete. This is a free publication that the NCAA Eligibility Center puts out every year. You can download it for free. The easiest way to find it is just to Google NCAA Eligibility Center, the Guide for the College-Bound Student Athlete. You can find all of the information that I present today in much greater detail, worksheets, sample questions to ask in the recruiting process, lots of really good information. So the NCAA Eligibility Center is located in Indianapolis, Indiana. It's run by the NCAA. They review all high school transcripts and test scores for all Division 1 and 2 prospects. The best time to register if you are at this point getting some interest from Division 1 or Division 2 school is during your junior year in high school. The cost currently is $90 to register. SAT and ACT scores can be sent directly to the Eligibility Center by marking code 9999, just like you would for a university. You put the code in to get the scores sent. You can do that with the Eligibility Center. Even if you haven't registered, you can have your scores shared with the Eligibility Center. And then at the time that you do register with the NCAA, they'll automatically merge those two. Through all of this, I strongly encourage you to work with your high school counselors to determine what a core course is at your institution specifically. So when I say core course, what am I talking about? So an NCAA core course, one core course is a full academic year of credit taught at a grade appropriate level in specific areas. The important thing to note is that in conjunction with the high school, the NCAA is the one that approves the core courses, not the high school. Each high school has an approved core course list on the Eligibility Center's website. If the course that you are taking in a given area is not on the high school list at the NCAA, it won't count as a core course. So it's really important to know, just because your high school considers it to be, let's say an English, does not mean that the NCAA is considering it to be an NCAA core course if there's something about it that is not taught at grade level or something of that nature. So the best thing that you can do is meet with your high school academic counselor to review your enrollment and your planned courses to make sure that you're going to meet NCAA core course requirements. So to determine initial eligibility, there are 4 components to academic eligibility. One is graduation. It seems like a pretty straightforward thing, but you have to graduate high school. 2, you have to complete a minimum number of core courses, which we'll get into those numbers here in just a little bit. You have a minimum core GPA, grade point average, in those courses, and a minimum matching ACT or SAT test score. For amateurism, you have to complete the amateurism questionnaire and any follow-up questions that you may have. So when we talk Division 1 core course requirements, remember a core course is 1 full year taught at grade level. You need to remember that the NCAA in Division 1 requires 16 core courses, 4 in English, 3 in math, 2 of a natural and physical science, 1 additional year from English, math, or science, 2 years of a social science, and 4 additional core courses. you really need to plan for this. You can't just say, I'm going to graduate and that'll be enough, because not all schools require this many in these areas. And you have to meet each of these areas in order to be fully eligible your first year at an NCAA Division I institution. Additional rule in Division I is that 10 of these core courses have to be completed prior to the start of your senior year in high school. 7 of the 10 have to be from the areas of English, math, natural, physical science. Now, the important, well, a good thing to remember here is if you are making normal progress towards your high school degree, so by the end of your junior year, you likely will have done 3 years of English, which is 3 of your 10. You'll likely have done 2 to 3 years of math, which will either get you to 5 or 6 of those core courses. And then natural physical science, if you've done that 3 years, so if you've done English, math, and science for 3 years, that's only 9. That's only 9 core courses. So you need to also have one more from an additional area in order to meet that 10. So the NCAA has what's called a sliding scale. Normally we'd have a handout, but if you're watching this online, just do a quick Google search for NCAA sliding scale, and it will use the, it'll pop up a result for you. So when we talk about the test scores that are on that sliding scale, if you've had an opportunity to Google search and bring up that page, you'll notice that the sliding scale has both a GPA and a test score. If you look at that test score under ACT or SAT, you'll notice that those are not normally what is reported as a test score. The ACT numbers are very, very high, and same with the SAT numbers. Now, the reason for that is because the NCAA uses something called a sum score. For the ACT, they add up the individual scores that you get in the English, math, reading, and science sections. And on the SAT, they will add up the scores that you get in the critical reading, verbal, and math sections. Now, the reason why they do this, and this is different from the normal score that you see reported, is, let's say, a 22. That's a composite score, meaning what the ACT does and what most universities do is they take the score from each of your subsections, add them up and divide it by 4, right? That gets you your composite score. The sum score is just adding all of them up individually. So in the first example here, you have a composite score of 22 with the sum scores in the English section, a 25, in the math section, a 20, reading 23, and the science at 20. So the NCAA would say your sum score there is an 88, right? Because we're taking 25, 20, 23, and 20. So, and most admissions offices are going to use the score of 22, the composite score. Now, the reason why the NCAA does this is because it provides more opportunities to get a higher score to meet qualification standards, because you can mix and match your subscores from taking multiple tests. So in this example, if a student took a second ACT and got a 23, their composite score only goes up by 1 point, goes from a 22 to a 23. But let's say that in the English section, they scored a 26. Well, that 26 is higher than the previous 25 that they earned. So the NCAA for the sum score would take the 26. In the math section, they scored a 19. So they went down a little bit. So the NCAA will stick with the 20 that they earned the first time they took the exam. In the reading section, they went from a 23 to a 25, so the NCAA will take that new 25. And in the science, they went from a 20 to a 22, so they would take that new 22. So the NCAA would take the best sum score from the 2 tests, and you would go from an 88 to a 93. So that's a pretty big jump, and it helps you to meet that qualifier standards. SATs are scored the same way, only there's only 2 sections as opposed to the ACT's 4 sections. So moving to Division II, you still need 16 core courses, just like you needed in Division I. However, instead of 4 years of English, you only need 3. You only need 2 years of math, 2 years of a natural physical science, 3 additional years from either math, science, or English, 2 years of social studies, and 4 years of additional core courses. So really, when it comes down to it, Division II is still 16, just like Division I is. However, there's a lot more flexibility in which classes that you take to meet those requirements. You still need 16, but you have much more flexibility in reaching that 16. It also does not have the requirement that you finish 10 by the start of your senior year. Now, the Division II test score and GPA requirements, the sliding scale is a little bit different. Their core course GPA starts at 2.0, whereas Division I starts at 2.3 as the minimum amount needed for eligibility purposes. Starting in fall 2018, so a couple of years ago, they actually now moved that from a 2.0. A 2.0 is now what's called a partial qualifier, and a 2.2 is now a full qualifier. Now, when I say things like qualifier, non-qualifier, partial qualifier, those are what status a student will get depending on how they complete high school. And the status that they get from the NCAA will determine whether or not they are immediately eligible to participate in athletics and whether or not they can receive a scholarship. So a full qualifier, so in Division I, you reach the 16, you reach the minimum GPA, you graduated, you reach the minimum core course GPA and test score. If you meet all of those requirements, you're eligible to have a scholarship, practice, and compete in your first year at a Division I university. You also have 4 years to compete. There's a secondary thing that can happen in Division I, and that's called an academic redshirt. So in that case, maybe you got to 16 core courses, but you didn't quite get to the 2.3 core course GPA that you need, or you didn't quite get the test score that you need. In those cases, the NCAA will deem you an academic redshirt, which means that you can practice and receive a scholarship in your first year, but that is all. You're not eligible to compete. And that's because at that point, the NCAA has said, you haven't done enough to be eligible, and therefore you need to spend some extra time kind of as a preparation year without having to worry about competition. A non-qualifier, so if you don't meet one of those categories, maybe you only got to 14 core courses, or maybe you only got to a 1.9 GPA or a 2.0 GPA. You're not allowed to have a scholarship, practice, or compete in your first year at a Division I school. In that case, you will only have 3 years to compete after you finish that first year at the university. There is an ability to regain the 4th year of competition, but not without some work. So one thing to note, now this, obviously with COVID, a lot has changed with the ability to take tests and the type of schooling that has occurred. The NCAA is providing some relief for students who are enrolling next year, fall 21 and spring 22. We don't yet know whether or not this will extend into the next academic year when many of your students will be matriculating to a university in fall 22, spring 23. At this point, it seems unlikely that it would extend that far, but we just don't know. So distance learning, hybrid learning, and e-learning normally require a separate evaluation by the NCAA in order to be considered a core course. However, if it is being offered by your high school, it no longer needs to be separately evaluated by the Eligibility Center. So any distance learning or hybrid learning that is happening this academic year will be considered just like a normal core course. Pass-fail courses, if you're issued a grade of pass, the eligibility will apply the credit earned. If the core GPA would increase by assigning a 2.3, which is considered a passing grade, the GPA will be assigned. But if it will hurt the core course GPA, let's say you're normally a 3.0 student, and therefore a 2.3 would bring down your GPA, they will not assign GPA, but you will still get credit for that core course. So it is important to know that these will apply for classes that take place this year, and we'll see what happens, and ones that took place last year as well. We'll see what happens moving forward. So the college admission process versus NCAA eligibility. So it's important to note here that these are two separate processes. Just because you're an NCAA qualifier does not mean that you're going to be admitted to a university. And just because you're admitted to a university does not mean that you're going to be an NCAA qualifier. They are two wholly separate processes and different determinations. One, the NCAA, is just determining whether or not you have done the kind of a minimum level of work at the high school level to be able to be successful at a collegiate institution while participating in athletics. The other, the university, is trying to make a determination of whether or not you are going to be the right fit for that institution based on the profile of the incoming students, and what type of learning's best at that university. So they are two different processes. So the final step to being eligible at an NCAA school is determining amateurism status. So prospects jeopardize their NCAA amateur status by formally declaring for a professional or signing a professional contract, competing with a professional team in hockey or accepting a salary, accepting prize money that exceeds expenses for an athletic event, or entering into an agreement or accepting benefits from an agent. In the state of Minnesota, we really only see this usually in men's hockey. Not a lot of other sports kind of have that level of, some in very few, but some in baseball. But we don't usually see amateurism issues for students who go to a high school in the state of Minnesota. So general recruiting concepts, just want to cover this quickly. If you're in the recruiting process, there are a lot of rules. The rules are at its base designed to protect high school students. The really important thing is to ask lots of questions during the process. You are making a choice about an institution and an athletic program as much as you are an individual coach or team that you're playing for, because that coach might move on at some point. Things might change within that program. They might run a different style of offense or defense. Things might change. But ultimately, you are at that university and within that athletic department. So it's important that you're asking lots of questions to make sure it's the right fit for you. So these are the general recruiting rules in Division I for limitations of when phone calls can be made, when correspondence, so letters and direct messages on Twitter, for instance, or emails, when those can come, and when the outgoing phone call, so when a coach is allowed to place a phone call. So all of these things remain in effect during some of you may have read that the NCAA is currently in an extended dead period, which does not allow off-campus recruiting during the majority of this academic year so far. But here are the dates. Regardless of sport, if you are a junior right now, it's permissible for you to place phone calls, to receive phone calls, to send emails, receive emails, all of those things as a junior at this point. So this is where it gets a little bit tricky. These are the normal dates For unofficial visits, that means a visit where the prospective student is paying their own way to come to a campus and visit. Official visits, where a university is paying for that student to come to campus. Off-campus contact, meaning a coach is coming off campus to have a face-to-face encounter with a prospective student athlete or their family members, or verbal offers of financial aid. All of the categories except for the last one, the first three categories, are all currently not allowed under NCAA rules until at least April of 2021. This is the NCAA started into a recruiting dead period, meaning no on or off campus recruiting in March of last year. It was renewed in August, renewed in October, and now just about 2 weeks ago, the NCAA extended it again until April. So that means that not allowed to have a visit onto campus. Coaches are not allowed to come off campus, and I think the NCAA plans on revisiting this probably in the March timeframe to see when it makes sense to maybe lift this. So some financial aid and scholarship basics. So Division III schools do not offer athletic scholarships. So when we talk Division III, we're talking about non-scholarship institutions such as for instance, in the state of Minnesota, there are many. There's St. John's, St. Benedict's, St. Olaf, McAllister, Bethel. All of these are Hamline University, Augsburg University. These are all Division III schools that do not offer athletic scholarships. However, they offer other financial aid packages that oftentimes, they're separate from participation in athletics, but they're often meaningful financial aid packages. In Division I and II, student athletes high school student athletes will generally sign something called a National Letter of Intent, or an NLI. That is a contract between the athlete and the college, and it is an offer of scholarship, of athletically related financial aid. And the agreement is, student athlete is saying, I agree to come to your institution and not go to any other institution. And the university is saying, if you come to our institution, this is the amount of financial aid that you'll receive. So there are penalties on both sides for breaking that. So it is important to note that that's, as of right now, the NCAA the NCAA does not, as a side note, the NCAA does not administer the National Letter of Intent. It's basically an agreement between universities. These can be multi-year agreements, meaning, laying out the next 4 or 5 years and how much aid you will receive during each year, or it can be a single year agreement. However, there are some standard things in there. First is the definition of a full scholarship. So if you're offered a full scholarship at a Division I or II institution, or Division I institution, that means tuition and fees, room and board, books, and cost of attendance. Summer aid is potentially available for scholarship student athletes, but not all institutions provide summer aid, and summer aid is not considered part of a normally signed athletic agreement. Those are for the academic year only. Fifth year, so exhausted eligibility aid to graduate may also be available, but that depends on the institution. And again, that falls outside of NCAA rules. So when we talk about how many scholarships are actually available, some sports are all or nothing sports. So football, men's and women's basketball, women's gymnastics, women's volleyball, and women's tennis are all considered head count sports, meaning if you're on scholarship at a Division I school, you're on a full scholarship. So all 12 of those women's volleyball student athletes are receiving a full scholarship. The rest of the sports are able to divide up their scholarships. They're called equivalency sports. The way that this works is, if we just take hockey, for example, Hockey, men's, women's ice hockey get 18 scholarships, and they can divide them up however they would like amongst their team. So if, let's say, you have 3 student athletes all getting a 33% scholarship, right? Then the 3 of them together add up to more or less 1 full scholarship under that 18. So then the team would have 17 more remaining to provide to their team. So that's all the information I have for you today. As I said, I really do encourage you to download the Guide for the College-Bound Student Athlete from the NCAA. It's a free PDF download that you can find. If you have questions, feel free to follow up. My email address is jeremiah@umn.edu. I know, again, a bit non-traditional this year, so likely to have some questions based on that presentation. Feel free to reach out and let me know, and I'll follow up with you. Look forward to being back in person with you, hopefully next year.